Good morning. This is Alana Mueller with Kauffman FastTrac. Welcome to the September edition of the Kauffman FastTrac Author Series. This morning it is my sincere pleasure to welcome my friend Harry Campbell, who is a senior executive with a strong track record of success over the past 26 years. Harry has been a president for 2 Fortune 500 companies, co-owner of an award-winning small business, CEO and board member of an internet startup, and founding member of the industry-changing Walmart/P&G customer team in Northwest Arkansas. He's driven exceptional people and business results in organizations of 5 to 3,500 employees in a broad range of industries, from consumer packaged goods to telecom to sports marketing to digital media. He's known as an identifier, developer, and motivator of exceptional talent at all levels of the organization. Today, Harry will share some insights from his book, Get Real Leadership. Please join me in welcoming my friend, Harry Campbell, to the Kauffman FastTrac Author Series. Welcome, Harry.
Thanks very much. I'm excited to be here. The next 45 minutes or so, what I'm going to do is a few things. First of all, I'm going to give you a context, a bit about me and my background. So I'm going to go beyond the intro and bio that Alana just gave you. And then I'm going to talk about the premises and why and how for my book, and then dive right into what I believe is the content, which is in 3 parts. So the first thing I'm going to do is give you a context of me and the fun that I've had in order to capture my stories and to have some fun on the speaking circuit. So here we go. It's always a little disconcerting to see your life in logos, but this is me. I did grow up in a rural, small town in southern Indiana, but I went to Vanderbilt. I was an East Asian history major and economics double major. I have no idea why, so no questions on that, please. My parents were both teachers, so it seemed like a good idea. I ended up getting my MBA at Indiana at the Kelley School, and then the logos below that, I use them as a visual to kind of prompt me to think about the craziness of the career I've had. It's actually a XY axis with size on the vertical axis and time on the bottom. And I want you to just look at this and realize that a lot of my career has been spent in big companies, P&G, Sprint particularly, and also Embark. But then in this crazy middle ground I had, you'll see MAI and UClick. And I want to talk about that in a minute, just to give you some perspective about kind of why my stories are where they are. So I came out of business school, 7 years in marketing, brand management at Procter & Gamble. I worked on Crest, Pepto-Bismol, and Metamucil. I like to say I was working down the body. I'm not exactly sure where I was going after Metamucil, but that's okay. You haven't lived till you've been in charge of the world of constipation. How about that? And it made telecom look really good later. Perhaps the coolest thing that I did when I was at P&G, I was offered the opportunity to move to Northwest Arkansas and help form, as a junior member, but form the Walmart Procter & Gamble customer team, which was the first consumer goods team, customer team in the United States. What a blast. I will tell you, it's one of the reasons why I'm sitting here today. It's why I wrote the book and why I operate the way I operate, because I had a chance to be around Sam Walton for a year and a half. And the simplest thing I will tell you is he was the nicest man I've ever met. He was wildly successful, richest man in the world at the time. But every time he saw me, he remembered my name. He asked me questions about my family. He was amazing. He was charismatic. He was caring, but he was also competitive and driven. And I had never seen someone that was wildly successful in business and nice. That fit my thought on how I wanted to operate, and he set me free to do that because I wasn't sure if you had to be mean in order to win. Don't forget, this was the mid-'80s. So 7 years at P&G, came to Kansas City to work for Sprint in 1992. I've been in Kansas City since, so everything to the right of Sprint is Kansas City. But 5 years after Sprint, after I'd been at Sprint, crazy me, I decided to leave the corporate world and became the co-owner of a sports marketing firm. About 20 people. I didn't start it. It was already successful, but it was a fun ride. What's cool about me sitting here at the Kauffman Center with the FastTrac folks is that in 1998, MAI won the Mr. K Award for the Business of the Year in the Kansas City area from the Chamber of Commerce. So it was a very cool and fun experience running that small business. Then here goes Harry again. I sold my half of that company because in 1999 and 2000, the internet NASDAQ run-up was happening, and I became, I went to work in the internet startup world and eventually became the CEO of UClick in, I'll call it the River Market area of Kansas City. Boy, that was a different experience. So now I don't have an assistant. I have to empty my own trash and have to figure out where to get the best deal on printer cartridges. Very different world from working at the big companies. The one thing I will say, though, is that I learned pretty dramatically that what I did on a day-to-day basis was very different in big companies and little, but leadership skills and principles transfer. They're very, very similar. I was amazed at how similar they are, and I'm going to talk a bit about that in the context of my book. After we got a couple term sheets but didn't get funding at UClick, I was out of a job. Oops. Went back to Sprint in my early 40s, and then a couple years later, Sprint spun off its landline company, $6 billion new company, which was later named Embark. I ran the consumer business for Embark. Dan Hesse, which is cool, he was one of my bosses at Embark. He was the CEO. As many of you all know, he's the CEO of Sprint now. So it was a cool experience. And then Embark was sold, and in the last 4 years, I've been on an interesting journey of capturing my thoughts, speaking, investing in businesses, networking, and really getting to know the community of Kansas City and spending time with my family, which is cool. I did a flyby at freightquote.com for a brief period of time. And then the bottom right, it says Outlook Partners. My wife and I are partners. We live on Outlook Street, so we formed this really fancy company called Outlook Partners. So that's my journey, and now I'm going to talk about that in the context of the stories I tell are going to be wrapped around these businesses. Before we leave today, one of the things I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you with a couple of things. First of all, this sheet that you see now is one that I cherish. I'm going to challenge you to do your own. You can do it in your head. I don't care. You can put it on a matchbook. I don't care. But I think you should do it. These are the people in my life, going all the way back to when I was growing up, that have had a direct influence, some bad, most good, on how I operate, what I do, how I treat people, how I think, and how I lead. I think it's very important to capture this. I think it's actually very cool to do. My pastor's up here. My high school basketball coach, my college cross-country coach, my East Asian history advisor from Vanderbilt, my good friends, my wife, Bobby Knight. I grew up in Indiana, so Bobby Knight has to be on the list. I married a Duke grad, so Coach K makes the list, even though I'm not a huge Duke fan. That's life. My question to you is, who's on your list? You'll see on here that Bernie Evers is on the list. If you worked in telecom during the time that I did, and Bernie Evers is not considered an influencer, I think you've missed something. What he did at MCI, WorldCom, and in the industry was not good. I believe he's in jail today and will be there for quite a while. Those things matter with regard to influence and mentoring as you're growing up in an industry. If you look at this, you can see that Madeleine Albright is on here. We hired her to speak at one point at an event I went to, and she was amazing. And I thought, wow, that lady has it going. I didn't know that she would be as good as she was, but she knocked it out of the park. Finally, I'll point out Pat Summit, interesting lady. Before she got dementia or Alzheimer's, I had her on the list. She is 8-time national champion of the women's basketball team at the University of Tennessee. If you want to talk about leadership, she's got it. And the grace and that she is handling her disease now is amazing too. So she's the kind of person that I look at. I've never met her, but I'd love to have her on my list. So who's on yours? Sam Walton was a big influence for me. He's, of course, on the list. I think it's critical that you think about this, because if you don't, then I think you're not going to be as purposeful as a leader as you can. So I've given you some context on me, and I've talked about mentors and influencers with regard to mine, but I'm going to challenge you to come up with yours. So with that, what I'd like to do is dive into the content from my book. And the book really comes down to two simple premises. One of them is that anybody can be a leader. And I truly mean that. It really has nothing to do with the size of your org, the amount of budget you have, the position you're in, your title, etc. I define it. Harry Campbell's definition of leadership is influence and impact. End of story, done. In fact, many of the best leaders I've ever seen were individual contributors or people that had to influence others and didn't have the opportunity to have positional power. So my first premise, anybody can be a leader, and the definition is influence and impact. Second of all is one that came directly from Sam Walton, and I was very joyful when I found it from him, and that is that you do not have to trade off relationship and respect to get results. The man was willing to make hard decisions when he needed to. He was wildly successful. He was beloved by his organization. He remembered people's names. He treated them well, but at the end of the day, he wanted to win. And you can't have it all. Don't forget, I grew up business-wise in the mid-'80s and '90s, and there were not a lot of people that showed that balance. So those are the two premises. So with regard to Get Real Leadership, I had to chunk this down, and so what I decided was that there's 3 specific areas that I think you need to get real in order to win and have influence and respect and influence and impact. And I'm going to talk about each of these separately. They're going to be yourself, your people, and your business. So I'm going to dive right in and talk specifically the first time about yourself. I will tell you that if you don't get this one right, you might not want to bother with your people and your business. Think about it as if you don't have the integrity and consistency and some of the things that I'm going to talk about with regard to getting real with yourself and leading yourself, you might win in the short term, but in the medium and long term, your organization is not going to follow you. They're not going to embrace you. They're not going to give you what you need in order to win. So let's talk about getting real with yourself. This whole area to me is centered on your personal brand. I talked about the idea that I came out of business school. I was 23 years old. I was working at P&G, and the thing that happens when you show up at Procter & Gamble is you are hit full in the face 24/7 by the idea that brands matter. I realized after I'd been there a bit that I actually had a personal brand. I'm not sure what the revelation was that I came up with, but I wanted to start to understand what my personal brand was and why it mattered, because it might make a difference if I ever decided to leave and interview for a job, or I wanted to talk to somebody about a promotion or a raise, or it had to do with what projects I was going to get, because your brand does matter. Everybody has a brand, just like Southwest Airlines, Diet Coke, etc. There are personal brands, and I think you need to figure out your personal brand, share it, and use it. And I'll go one step further and say, if you don't think personal brands matter, I want you to take a look at these pairs of folks. And the crazy thing about it is, other than the bottom left, these aren't good and bad. They're just different. And the bottom left is an example. I'm a big baseball fan. You think about Barry Bonds and what he's been through, and he hasn't ever been proven nor convicted of anything. But at the end of the day, his brand has been dramatically tarnished. I would suspect he will never get into the Hall of Fame. I don't know that. I'm not a voter, but it's tough. Think about the picture next to him, Jackie Robinson, and the brands and the word, his personal brand and the words that are associated with Jackie Robinson. And I'll go one step further, and I'll tell you that he was not picked because he was the best player necessarily to break the color barrier in baseball. He was a great player, but because Branch Rickey decided that he could put up with it, because he had integrity and character, and he was an amazing strength. Think about that as a personal brand. Pretty cool. Top right's amazing too. I was around Sam Walton for a year and a half. I've never met Steve Jobs. I've read his book, or the book about him. They were wildly opposite with regard to how they operate. They were both crazy successful, so I'm not saying right or wrong, but Sam Walton was an incredibly beloved man who ran an organization the way he wanted to, and Steve Jobs, just the opposite, very, very much of a perfectionist. Different brands. Very important. So I'm going to challenge you to figure out what your personal brand is. Harry Campbell makes it up on his own and says your personal brand is the 7 words that describe you. You need to, I would challenge you to sit down and write the 7 words that you think describe you, and then try to find out what the world, what others think your 7 words are, and you need to find those out anonymously if at all possible. I don't think it's going to surprise you that it needs to be anonymous, because if you walk up to someone that knows you or that you know face to face and you ask them words to describe you, I believe you're going to get far more positive words than are fair. It's not to say that you don't deserve some of the positive words, but people are not regularly used to giving direct feedback, particularly words that aren't nice to people face to face. So you needed to find it out anonymously. The other thing I can tell you is the reason I chose 7 is not very scientific. I started doing this about 20 years ago with myself, and I would ask people 4 words, and it was too easy. I found that if I asked them for 7 words, 5, maybe 6 and 7 were hard. It was hard to come up with. The first few, they might give you something about your intelligence or your personality or something, but when you get to 5, 6, and 7, they had to struggle, and I liked it when they had to struggle because they had to think about what my personality and my brand was, and that was important. So the 7 was made up, but it works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to challenge you to figure out your personal brand. If you go to my website, harryscampbell.com, you'll see on the screen this circle, which is my 7 words. It's a very simple little application. You register on the website. You're able to put email addresses in of people you want feedback from. An email goes to them requesting 7 words. It comes back to the site, and then you can go and gather that feedback, and it's anonymous. It's called feedback number 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So you don't know who said what, but it gives you a flavor for what the world thinks your brand is. I'm going to stop here for a second and emphasize, I don't care what your words are. You should, but it's not hugely important that they're what they are. What's most important is you understand them. I want to emphasize how critical that is, because if you're a airline, if you're Southwest Airlines and you decide you want the brand to be luxury, I think you got a problem, because it's not. It's an incredibly, I think freedom is their single word they would use to describe it. It's efficient, unbelievably efficient, and it's joyful and a lot of other words, but it is not luxury. That's okay. So the gap between what you believe your brand is, your 7 words, and what others say is more important than what your words are. Once you gather it, if you want to tweak it or change it or do the words differently, that's fine, or you want to change your brand. But most importantly, you need to find it out so you can figure out what the gap is between what you believe your brand is. Because in an organization, if you want to be successful, you want to be promoted, you want to change jobs, you want to do something different, your brand will matter. Okay? So I would challenge you to do this, and it's fun. I'm going to put a little disclaimer on this. The first time you do it, it's disconcerting. Welcome to the world. You're going to get words back. You're going to have to do a little synonyms and matching words, and then you're going to find out that of the 7 words that came up most often, you agree with and like 5. You agree with and don't like 1, and you don't agree and don't like 1, and it's that 1 that's going to bother you. And it may be a bunch of people think you're rude, and you have no idea that you're rude. You don't believe you're rude, but you want to find those people and say, please, no, it can't be me. Stop that. Don't worry about it. I want you to reflect on the idea of why those people said what they said. They told you what they believe your brand is. And if you don't agree, maybe that's the most important lesson you're going to get is why did they say it and what's up. So a personal brand is critical from my standpoint because it has to do with self-awareness and how we're going to go back to influence and impact and being a leader. It's very, very important to me that you try to figure that out. So once you've figured out your personal brand, I go 2 steps further. One thing is share it, and then I'm going to talk a bit about using it. But share it is important to me because I believe transparency and consistency are critical. Whenever I would get a new job at Sprint or Embark or any place like that, I would get my 7 words out. I would put them up on the screen, and I would say, this is me. For better, for worse, I like a lot of the words. A couple of them make me flinch, but at the end of the day, this is me. That transparency, I believe, truncates a process that's going to happen anyway. The new boss. Who is he? How is he? I am unbelievably impatient. If I tell people that, they don't have to try to figure it out while I start shaking my legs 4 minutes into a meeting, and I don't like interacting the way they want me to interact because of my impatience. But transparency is critical, not necessarily the actual words, but telling them who and how you are and why. So I would say share it, share it, share it, your brand. It's fun. The final one is consistency, and this is pretty straightforward. If you tell people your brand and you tell people how you operate and you put a little bit of the truth up there, which includes the good stuff and the not so good stuff, and you act that way, and you show people that that is you, and you're very self-aware, it's amazing how the organization will relax more. They don't have to love exactly who you are and how you are, but to be consistent with regard to that brand is very important. And I think of that as in products. You buy the same product, whether it's Crest toothpaste or you go to McDonald's, the consistency that you get what you expect really relaxes you and enables you to pay attention to other things. And if you're a leader and you're trying to drive results and you're trying to do that via influence and impact, consistency is very, very important. So we've talked about figuring it out and sharing it. Now let's talk about using your personal brand. This is a couple things that I really like to point out. One is accountability. If I get up in front of a group and say, this is me and this is my brand, there's a good chance that that holds me accountable, and I like that. I think that builds trust. It's a kissing cousin of consistency, but in fact what it does is it says this is the way I'm going to operate. And I think being accountable is very important, and it's one of the uses you can have for the personal brand. The other one is the right people. One of my favorite business books, and gosh, I read it a long time ago, is Good to Great by Jim Collins. And in there it talks about getting the right people on the bus in the right seats. I use this personal brand 7 words in order to do a final check step on hiring. Let me tell you the story. The last number of years I was in big jobs at big companies. I was able to do this, and I decided that I was no longer going to do outside hires because I had been fooled several times. People that came from across the country to interview for a job, they looked good, communicated well, had a great resume, the references were stellar. I didn't know them. I'd never met them, but we vetted them pretty thoroughly, but I still made a couple mistakes because they were really good at selling. Imagine that. So I said, okay, I'm not going to do that anymore. We're at a big company, so I can get away with this. And you could roll your eyes and say, wow, no external hires is not going to be great. But, you know, when you're in a company of 40,000 people, you can do this. So I decided no more external hires. So when I had a big job available, I would narrow down the list. And when I got the list narrowed down, what I would do is I would say, okay, my final 2 candidates are Bill and Susan. And I would find 5 people that know Bill and 5 people that know Susan that are not on their reference list. In a big company, there are folks that know you. Believe me, even in a small company, there are folks that know you that aren't on your reference list. They might actually have an office next to yours, but they work in a different department. They know you. I would find those people that know them, and I would leave a voicemail for 5 people that know each of my candidates. And my voicemail is simple. I don't want to talk to you. I don't want paragraphs. I don't want sentences. I want nothing. I want 7 words from you to describe Bill. And then I do the same for 5 people for Susan. So at that point, I would have 35 words to describe each of them. It's interesting when you get that back. You don't get a lot of negativity, but you get consistency with regard to how they operate. And one time, I actually figured out very easily from the words that came back that the person that I thought of managed up very differently than down, and the organization really, really didn't like him. And I thought, wow, I didn't get that from the interview process. I didn't know it, and it's important. You don't use this 7-word process to try to find people that are just like you. That's a bad idea. You use it to try to find out if you're getting what you expect, and it may be someone that compliments you, someone that is the opposite of you. It doesn't matter to me. But I think using this 7-word process is pretty cool because here's what I would say, the grassroots word on you in an org is something you need to know if you're going to work with somebody. And you can find that out from finding out their personal brand and their 7 words. So we've talked about the foundation level of getting real and getting real with yourself. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to move up one in the ladder, and I'm going to talk about getting real with your people. And in the context of this, what I'm going to talk about is connecting, communicating, and covering their butts. And as we dive into this at the second level, connecting is a pretty cool one. The statements that I would make here are damn simple, by the way. The first one, treat them like adults. Hello. Think golden rule here. If you treat people like adults, it's amazing. Harry Campbell's theory of human behavior is getting ready to come out now. 98.2 is my theory. If you have an organization, and I've seen this, and I'll talk about it in a minute here about specifics, and you give an organization good direction, and you put good leaders in who have influence and impact, You give people the opportunity to vent in appropriate ways at appropriate times. You give them a chance to put input and ideas in that aren't just dismissed but at least looked at. I am convinced, and I have seen 98% of the people will do a solid to a great job. I'm amazed. I've seen very bad call centers of a couple hundred people turn their business around completely with new leadership. The people want to do well. They're able to do well. They're willing to do well, but they weren't doing well because they were not being treated like adults. 98-2. By the way, the 2 is human nature. There's cheaters, there's liars. You got to find them and fire them. In my experience, one of the biggest issues we have as companies is we're so worried about being cheated and being messed with by the people that are not good at their jobs that we put rules and regulations and policies in place that actually puts binders on the 98%. My theory is treat everybody like an adult, turn them loose. The 98 are going to kill it. They're going to get great results. They're going to do everything that you need them to do, and life is going to be better. You find the 2 and you fire them, but you quit worrying about the 2. That's what I've seen. I'll go one step further on this. When I took over Consumer Markets at Embark, I think we had maybe 2,500 people that we had on the phone. They were making $11 to $15 an hour in rural areas like Medford, Oregon, and Tarboro, North Carolina. They were driving 30 to 45 minutes for Fortune 500 benefits and call center jobs. These people were the salt of the earth. When I took over the group, we had a simple rule that said if you were 5 minutes late, you got an occurrence. 3 occurrences is a tardy, 3 tardies, and you lose your job. I said, wow, that's a little rough. We're talking about people that have daycare issues. They drive 40 minutes sometimes. They could get behind a farm implement. There could be traffic trouble. All sorts of things could happen. 5 minutes isn't much wiggle room, and the organization really, really, really didn't like it. We changed the policy very simply. We treated them like adults. There's a little bit of a golden rule here, and we changed the policy and turned it into give us 8. We put an hour boundary around 7:30 to 8:30 in the morning and said you can come early, and if you do, you can leave early at the end of the day. If you come late, just stay late. You've got 30 minutes wiggle room on either way. When we announced it, we got a standing ovation from thousands of people. You would have thought we'd have doubled their darn pay. It was crazy. Why would that be possible? Well, the fact is we were starting to treat them like adults. And by the way, the business results started getting better and better. Retention was better, so we weren't losing people and having to replace them and having startup costs with each of the seats in the call centers. Our service results got better. Our sales results got better. We were treating them like adults. It's crazy. You have to do that. The interesting thing about that, and an unintended consequence that happened on that in a very good way, was that there were people that said, we're not being tracked as closely. I could come in late and leave early and no one's going to care. Well, the fact is the management team wasn't tracking them and messing with them and saying you can't do it, so they thought they would get away with it. Guess what? Someone does care. Their peers. So we would have groups of 3 and 4 call center reps going over to somebody who happened to be in the 2% and saying, hey, dude, you're not giving them 8. We know you're coming in late. We know you're leaving early. You know it. We love the new system. We hate the old system. If we have to change back, we're going to really hurt you. I think they were kidding. But the fact is they wanted it, and they were peer pressure helped keep that policy in place, which was beautiful. So if you really want to connect with people and get real in this area, I say treat them like adults. This goes hand in hand with the next one I want to talk about, which has to do with connecting via attitude. The first half of my career or so, I really emphasized when I'm hiring somebody and promoting people skill sets and background. I changed that and flipped it around in the second half. I lowered the bar some. It's still a real bar with regard to experience and skill sets, but I lowered that bar and looked for attitude. I wanted to find people that you want to walk down the hall with because they got mojo. I want to find people that face the brutal facts but are optimistic about life and about winning. I want to find people that have this positive cloud around them. It's the opposite of someone that you share a cube with but you don't want to talk to them, so you leave them a voicemail because they bring you down whenever you spend time with them. I want to have those people on my team because I have found it enables you to connect with people and do really well. Let me tell you a story real quickly. I was down in Arkansas working on the Walmart Procter & Gamble customer team. I'd been down there 2.5, 3 years. I was getting ready to come back to Cincinnati to be a brand manager. I thought I was going to be incredibly impressive and be the brand manager of Crest or Tide or something like that. And I showed up and they told me I was brand manager of Metamucil. I had my knees buckled a little bit and I said, wow, okay, I'm going to be number one and number two business. They didn't think that was nearly as funny as I did. I said, okay. So I went and I got my business team assembled, and they were doing fine on the business, but they were a little embarrassed to work on it. I said, folks, this is a $160 million business. It's our job. Let's get after it. They weren't, and they were still bummed, so I did something which was very Harry-like, and I created an attitude award. And I requested recommendations and gave an award away to the person on my business team once a month, to the person with the best attitude. Not the person that worked all night, the person that delivered the best results. And we have plenty of ways in organizations to reward people, but not enough to recognize them. So I was doing a recognition program. Well, let me tell you, 6 months after I'd done this, every time we had a business meeting, the previous winners wore their shirts because they wore them with pride. They were being told by their management and their peers that they had a great attitude. How cool is that? Well, the shirts cost $8, and all of a sudden, in global Procter & Gamble, we became known as the brand that had these cool shirts, and people would walk around with pride. Folks wanted to work on our business. Our business results got a bit better because we had a better attitude, and I loved it. So I will tell you that the shirt, here's the shirt. Yes, that is the color. I tried to make it the color of an intestine because Metamucil works on the intestines. His name is Mr. Happy Bowel. You can see on his hat. That's who he is. The shirt is old school, 1991. So about the 4th or 5th time you washed it, the logo started crinkling up and would probably come off. This is the only one that hasn't been washed. It's still at my house. So you think about it. The people in marketing and on the business team of Metamucil loved getting this darn shirt. They were being told they had a great attitude. Think about the importance of that and how that kind of recognition matters to folks. It's just nuts. When I came to Sprint in 1992, I actually brought the idea. I didn't think Sprint could handle Metamucil and Mr. Happy Bowel, so I changed it. And I changed it to Who's Your Hysteria, because now I have a platform. I'm from Indiana. I told you that. I love basketball, right? So it's Who's Your Hysteria. And I started numbering the shirts, and I've given away 194 at Sprint, Who's Your Hysteria, and I gave probably 50 away at P&G for Mr. Happy Bowel. The bottom line is people love these things. They put on their resume they won the award because it says, I have a great attitude. So we've talked about with regard to getting real with people, we've talked about connecting. Now let's talk about communicating. This is one that makes me nuts. Having been a senior executive at a couple of big companies, I've seen this dude stand up here and tell me, blah, 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 aren't I impressive? We're going to leverage the synergy, and we're going to fight the global sandbox thing and all this stuff. I think this does nothing for you with regard to influence and impact. I think a lot of people do this. I've had several bosses that talk about fancy words, and I think it doesn't do any good for the organization. And I speak this, think about it, I talked about at Embark, I had 3,500 people in my group. 2,500 of them are making somewhere in the neighborhood of $13 an hour in a call center. Let me tell you, they are more concerned about their daycare issues than they are about the vision of the company. So you have to figure out how you're going to communicate them and get real with them. The three things that I would say very simply with regard to getting real in communication is starting with answer the question. Oh, man. Q&A sessions at the end of a big corporate thing, you've got the big boss up there. They're pretty unproductive because no one's going to ask a real hard question or a risky question, especially in a group of, somewhere between 100 and 1,000 people at a company with the boss on the stage. If they do, they're not going to get a straight answer. It just doesn't happen. In my experience, you get the 1-minute answer that uses a lot of 5-syllable words and doesn't answer it. I would say do the opposite. Answer the question. Actually start with yes, no, maybe, or I don't know, and then move on if you have an explanation. Second of all, talk like a real person. I know that sounds kind of simplistic, but good grief. if you talk like a real person, you're more likely to get trust. You're more likely to have people that pay attention to you and feel like what you're doing is you're trying to communicate with them. And the final one is near and dear to my heart, is be willing to say, I don't know. It's one of my favorite sets of words. I didn't realize this was going to happen, but it's one of the reasons why I left Procter & Gamble. It's one of the lists of reasons. I was in a very big, important meeting that had, in theory, nothing to do with me at P&G. There was probably 4 or 5 levels of people that were addressing the CEO, and I was in the side and in the back. I was the brand manager of Metamucil, and the CEO of P&G spun around and asked me a question. I was a bit taken aback and stunned. I said, I don't know, but I will get back to you. It was a very fair answer, because guess what? I didn't know. The next 20 seconds seemed like 2 years, and it was crickets. And I realized at that point that the culture said I should have made something up or said something other than I don't know, and that's just not the way I operate. I think the answer is I don't know. You say I don't know. That's the way it goes from my standpoint. So if you're going to get real with communication, think long and hard about how you answer questions like that. The final one with regard to getting real with people has to do with cover their butts. Let me tell you, this goes more directly to people that have people that work for them, but not necessarily. You could have people that you're influencing. But frankly, you got to manage the boss. I like to joke that at some companies, if the boss walks down the hall and mumbles something, it turns into a 3-week task force that 12 people are working night and day to get it done, and they bring it into the boss, and the boss says, why are we doing that? And the answer is because you said. Well, if you're in charge and you know the prioritization of your group and what your group is working on, your boss says something, maybe what you should do is say, do you really want us to do that? If you do, this is going to have to give, or we're going to have to do this. I know too many people that just assumed that the boss was the boss and it wasn't going to happen any other way, so we're going to do it. I disagree completely. I think one of the things you have to do is manage the boss. And by the way, it's not necessarily a bad thing. Managing the boss and delivering good results, they will appreciate it because they need to do less with you. Also under the same area, covering their butts, is the celebrating the journey. One of my bosses, I showed up, the first thing he said when I got there was that we are going to set objectives that we can never reach. And I was quiet and I said, I'm sorry, I didn't understand what you were saying. And he said, no, you heard me. We're going to set objectives it's not possible to reach, because data shows that means the organization will actually deliver more if we do that. I said, you know what? That's very possible. In fact, it's probably true, but it takes all the fun out of it. I said, we can't celebrate. We don't feel like winners. And I said, in the short term, that may not matter, but the medium and the long term, that matters. You need to celebrate the journey. You need to have milestones. You need to have stretch objectives that you can make and spike the ball and move on. He said, not going to happen. I said, okay. We proceeded to have a great year, missed our budget, over-delivered. The board was happy. The shareholders were happy, but the organization felt like a failure because we missed our budget. I just think that's a wrong idea. And if you're going to get real with your people, one of the things you need to do is find ways to celebrate the journey and set milestones you can celebrate. And then the final one in this area is very simple. And I would just say that if you have people that work for you, or you're in a job that matters deeply, how you handle the first real big mistake may be the most important thing that happens. If you overreact or torch somebody or publicly humiliate somebody or do something like that, I will tell you, it will stick with the org maybe for a decade. It will stick with you. How you handle that is critical, because it also could change the culture of how your company operates. If there's a mistake, by the way, mistakes happen. That's life. Fail forward, fail fast, figure it out. But if you take that person and you treat them poorly, or the organization has a perception that their mojo has been decreased inside the company because of their mistake, you will change the risk profile of your org. You will get less innovation, less risk-taking, and I would argue worse results. So think very clearly, if you want to get real with people, how you handle that first mistake very, very clearly. So we've talked now about getting real with yourself and getting real with your people. The third one, and I'll call it the top of the pyramid, is getting real with your business. And this is actually the fun one. In fact, if you can do the first two when you get to this one, it's very cool. We're going to talk about getting real with your business in 3 ways. We're going to talk about step up, measure up, and change it up. And the first one, step up, wow, is this simple. Here's what I would say. Do your job. Do your job. Quit talking to me about when you're going to get promoted next, when you want your next raise, what's going to happen, and why this is bad, and why the sun's hurting your eyes when you're sitting at your desk. I don't care. Do your job. Be the person that delivers on-time great results, on-time good work. Be that person. Be the one, as the picture, as the slide shows, that stamps it and says guaranteed. The crazy thing about it is everybody knows this. In any organization, there are people that get more work than others. You know why? Because their brand is someone that delivers it well, and on time. And if they're going to miss a deadline, they communicate in advance, and they talk about why and how, and they set a new deadline. Step up. If you want to get real with your business, you need to step up and do your job. My son had a friend that was a bagger at a local grocery store, and I heard him talking one time, and they didn't even know that I was listening. And my son's friend said, yep, bagging is not easy and it's not that fun, but I'm going to be the best bagger they got. I'm good at it. I'm fast. I do it right. If I do that, then I can choose my own shifts. And then if I do that well, I have a chance to move up to be a checker. And then if I do that well, I have a chance then to maybe supervise some people. I don't want to do this the rest of my life, but I'm going to do as well as I can because it gives me options and availability to do other things. I was stunned. I said, wow, that teenager's got it down. He was deciding he was going to do his job and not complain. I loved it. Do your job. So we've talked about step up. Let's talk about measure up. Now, one of my favorite things to do is find, if I'm looking for an employee or trying to invest in a business or something, I like to find people that have competed. I don't care whether it's debate, dance, athletics. I love competitors, and it's very simple. I'll tell you why. It's because they've had sweaty palms, they've thrown up, they've won, they've lost, they've had to handle victory, defeat, they've had to do it all, they've had to handle a family that has higher or lower expectations of them. I love people that compete. One of my things I say to my kids all the time is if it doesn't have a scoreboard, why bother? Because life does. Life is not spring training. Life matters, and competition matters. Now, you need to do it appropriately, but by gosh, you've got to figure it out. And if you can't do that, then I think what's going to happen is eventually when it gets tough and things are hard, you're not going to be as effective, and you might even fold. Who knows? I'd love to find those people that have done that. Compete. Compete, compete. I timed myself to work every day when I worked at Sprint and Bark, and this is silly. I lived 4.5 miles from work. It was all surface roads. I had a bunch of choices on the ways I could go. My deal was with myself, I could go 5 miles over the speed limit. My horn was available. Everything else was all fair game, and I timed myself, and I got it from 9 minutes and 13 seconds down to 8:27 before I left the company. I would get out when I set my new record, and I would spike my briefcase and say, it's going to be a big day. Here we go. Compete, compete, compete. It is so cool, and I will tell you, leaders love folks that compete appropriately. Think about how you can do that. The final one under measure up has to do with the energy of the organization from my standpoint. Every organization has 100% of the energy, and the question is how much is external. It sounds like a little trite statement, but I will tell you, if you have an organization that's worried about layoffs or has some bad managers, there's a whole lot of energy going on trying to figure out how to manage the manager or who they need to align with in order not to get laid off, and doing all the water cooler talk and or chatting or texting and not doing the job. When I was running Metamucil, I wanted folks to pay attention to Citracillin X-Lax, and I wanted them to pay attention to their advertising, their pricing, their distribution, their promotions. I did not want them worrying about what I was going to do and whether their job was safe. If you can do the right thing with regard to measuring up and competing and making sure that the organization is competing and trying to win with the external competitor, you will be much more wildly successful. And you have a chance at that point, I would say, to have more influence and impact. And then the final one under this has to do with change it up. I love people that think out of the box. If you're my VP of marketing and you're thinking about customer service and sales, that's cool. I say bring it on. I like people that think peripherally. They want to win. They want to help their peers. They want to change. They want to shake it up. They may be thinking about changes in the business model. Bring it on. Be the person that thinks about that and that studies and reads and understands. Because if you're standing still, you are losing because the world is coming after you. If you're in first place, everybody's shooting at you. If you're in second, you better be driving to be first because the people below you are coming after you. If you are standing still, you're losing. You need to shake it up. Deal with the status quo by breaking it. And not only be the person that visualizes and sees the change, but also, if you can, and it's appropriate, be the person that drives it. That's the fun stuff. That's really cool to be able to do that, and I love that. So with regard to getting real with business, it comes in all three of these flavors. I said step up, measure up, and change it up. So what I've done is I've outlined this, I'll call it a pyramid with a foundation. At the bottom is getting real with yourself. In the middle is getting real with people, and that's people that are beside you, above you, and below you, 360 view. You need to be able to do that by connecting and communicating with them and covering their butts. And then in the business, we've talked about the competition and doing your job. I contend that if you can do all three of these things and you really pay attention and you really focus on influence and impact, what you can do is drive wild results, and you have the opportunity to get real and win. Thank you very much.
Harry, thank you so much. That was just perfect. So engaging and wonderful information for all of us to take away. So thank you so much.
You're welcome.
We do have a few questions that have come in, and I would encourage anybody who's listening, if you have a question, please type it into your question section on your webinar dashboard, and we'll get to as many questions as we can. The first question has to do with the 7 words. So you talked about the app that's on your website, and can you remind us what the website is?
Sure, harryscampbell.com.
So and if you go to the bottom where it says my 7 words, right?
It's the tab bar right about a third of the way down the front page.
Perfect. One of our listeners asked, should we be sending this to our employees?
I love this question. It depends. The answer is, I think yes. I'm going to give 2 different views of this. I know people that have done this twice, once for their home personal brand and once for their business personal brand, because they operate differently and they want to make sure they don't mix the results. But if you're just talking business, I would argue that having a view of people beside, above, and below you is important. So I would send it to your employees to get their feedback.
That's great. You were talking a little bit about people answering questions and being real about their answers and answering very directly and honestly and with real language. One of our listeners asked, what's the question that someone asked that was the hardest for you to answer?
Ouch. I actually remember this one very well. The company I was with was in selling discussions. Looked like we were going to be purchased, and that had a damper on everything and everybody in the org. And the question was very simply, if we sell, will the jobs that are here stay, and how will we be personally affected? And I tell you, that was a great one. It was very simple because I didn't know, and I said, I treated this as if I was in the audience, and I said, I don't know, obviously I don't, but I'm just going to tell you, if we sell, we won't be in charge of those decisions, so there's a reasonable chance it won't go well for us. That was a hard way to answer it because the easy way would have said, who knows, we'll see. But reality to me said 80 to 90% chance it's not going to go well. And I told them, I think they appreciated it, but still was very, very difficult to hear.
Yeah, absolutely. Another question from before was, in your book, you talk about, you gave an example of somebody who misinterpreted Get Real Leadership, and it was Get Real Leadership or Get Real Leadership. Can you? I don't know if I used the right inflection, but I loved that story. Would you talk a little bit about that and kind of your reaction when you realized that the person had misunderstood Get Real Leadership?
Yeah, and I love saying that words matter. and this is a great example, where you put the comma, where you put the emphasis. I use this, and by the way, my mom was an English teacher, so the reason my title of the book is Get Real Leadership and it's hyphenated is because when it's a compound adjective, it's hyphenated. But if it's get real as in an action, comma, leadership as in you guys, which is what a lot of people would say, it strikes at home. I made the mistake one point in the same story of talking about they when I was in front of my org, and someone in my group raised their hand and said, okay, Harry, you're one of the top 3 or 4 officers of a Fortune 400 company. Just who is they to you? Yeah. And I said, ouch. And he said, I think you need to be more real with us. And this was before I came up with the book. And I said, you know what, that's fair. Any of those are fair. I think all of those iterations of get real leadership, or any variation is really the organization saying, treat me like an adult, talk to me well. I know you need to make hard decisions, but it's important for me that I get the straight scoop.
That's great. Thank you so much. Another listener says, if you're a startup and have to go outside the organization to hire, do you have any thoughts on how to spot good salespeople and to avoid surprises that they can bring?
You know, this is a hard one because you're not going to be able to find, it's going to be very hard to find people that can do the 7 words thing. I've had to do this, and what I did was I made a more thorough interview panel. And I made a broad-based interview panel of people with all different, for lack of a better term, Myers-Briggs personality profiles, because there's more of a chance that you can get the real scoop on people when you have not. It doesn't matter how many people interview somebody, but if the makeup of the people that are interviewing someone are wildly different, you have a better chance of ferreting out these surprises in the sellers.
That's great. Another listener talks about when there are negative aspects to a personal brand. So whether it's through the use of the 7 words or you happen to know that somehow you're being poorly perceived or misperceived, how do you change those negative aspects and perceptions?
Wow. How about full disclosure here? Whenever I do my 7 words, and I do it every couple of years, there's about 8 or 10 words that come out more frequently, but there are some that are, I'm going to call them outliers, and you're going to see why. Maybe they come up one time every other time I do it, and it'll be something like rude. I will tell you, when you get something like that, the first thing it does is it kind of takes your breath away because you want to say, wait a minute, I'm not rude. How? Who could possibly think of me as rude? What I think you have to do is, first of all, there's a difference between outliers and ones that come up occasionally and ones that define your brand. I wouldn't worry about the outliers. You can't. There's nothing you can do about it. You can think about it and maybe tweak your behavior, but at the end of the day, it is what it is. If it's something that's core and you ask 6 people and 5 people say you're rude, you really, truly have to take a hard look and say, is it an aspect, even if it's negative, that I'm okay with? And if that's true, then that's fine. If it's an aspect that I didn't know about, it surprised me, and I don't like it, I think the only thing you can do is look inside you and say, is it my communication? Is it my email? Is it my verbal communication? Is it how I operate with people? Do I show favoritism, or am I too abrupt? And you have to ask yourself why that word came up. And if you can do that, I think you can change it.
Great. One of our listeners says, how do you advise a small business of 20 or fewer employees to embody your concepts? Some of this seems hard when you have 2 layers of management.
I've been in a 20 and a 40 person company, and I didn't necessarily worry about putting, I'll call it, I'm sorry, the stories would be different, but to me the principles are the same. They come back to the idea of answering the question, communicating with people, having policies and procedures that are real. You know, when I'm talking to at UClick, I would talk to the whole company. They'd be in one room. And I had the same issues, even though that there was only 2 levels. It was me and 2 other levels in the company. I don't think it's any different. What you have to do is you just have to realize that people are longing and thirsting for authenticity, and they're asking you to treat them like adults. And if you do that, I think it can work. I've seen it myself. Now, depending on the culture, it's possible that you could get sideways, but I believe it can work.
Thank you. Somebody asks, how do you manage female conflict in the workplace? She says that most of that conflict is based on one woman's fear of another, or the fear that if she wins, then I can't. How have you diffused fights, and what suggestions do you have for how managers can help women lose their fear of achieving among one another?
The first thing I will say, and this is truth on truth, I don't think that's a female-male issue. You may think it is, but that's human issue. Fear, inadequacies drive people to do crazy things, information hoard, etc. Here's what I do. I do everything I can to model, expect, and hold accountable folks for not doing crazy things and acting like that. I've had people like that work for me. I've inherited them. I never hired one, thank goodness, that operates that way. But what I do is, in the first 2 times it happened, this is the way I did it, Harry Campbell's model. First 2 times I saw it, I openly talked about it. I never leave the elephant in the room unspoken. I openly talk about it with the people, and I have found that folks that have stuff exposed and talked about and addressed find it very hard to misbehave and act differently. So that's my experience. I will also say, not answering this question, but as a tangent here, I was once the HR department at a couple companies, went back and looked. I tend to hire 2/3 of my direct reports as females, because given that I look for nice people that interact well and they're very teamwork oriented, the females' traits, like on a Myers-Briggs, tend to be ones that I'm more interested in. A-plus players that are females are the ones that I tended to hire, which I thought was, well, wow. So I very rarely saw this, because if you were nice and you're an A-plus player, you weren't doing this territorial stuff.
Great. Harry, in your book, you talk a little bit, and we've talked today even about that words matter, that language is important. And one of the phrases that you used in the book that I just loved was, don't use 50 words when one will do. So talk a little bit. Don't use 50 words when one will do. Talk a little bit more about that. I know you've talked about, being honest in your remarks, but if you could go a little bit further on that one.
Yeah, that was a fair one, and it comes back to the idea of communicating and having memorability. If you're talking to a group and you get a question that you want them to know the answer, give it to them. If the answer is no or yes, it's very easy. I think explanations are fine. I think a lot of times they turn into excuses and pontification in my experience. I've been up on stage doing the executive roundtable auditorium Q&A, and I've had a peer that spent 2.5 minutes talking about something, and at the next question I said no, and I stopped, and they got a standing ovation, and it embarrassed him, and I'm not proud of that, but the fact was, it was just crazy. Most people are looking for an answer, and they're looking for a short one.
Very good. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And with that, thank you so much for being here. It was just wonderful to have you.
Oh, you're welcome.
Really
I had a blast.
And I want to thank all of our listeners today. I hope that you'll all join us again in October. We're going to have our next author series on Wednesday, October 16th at 10 a.m. Central Time. We'll hear from Jason Best and Woody Nice, who wrote the book Crowdfund Investing for Dummies. These guys are experts on the Jobs Act and when it comes to what crowdfund investing looks like. So I hope you'll come for that one as well. Everybody have a wonderful month, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks. Bye-bye.